Christopher Hadnagy, welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, it's great. I know your book is in hacking, and I wanted to dig in a little bit because our audience, as we talked about off mic, is entrepreneurs who are about to go through the most important transaction of their lives. Millions of dollars are at stake in many cases, even tens of millions of dollars. And as we talked about, there's a huge difference between an entrepreneur's approaching this conversation. They tend to be very emotional. It's their baby they're selling in many cases. And the buyer often has a private equity group or corporate buyer. They're unemotional. They're mercenaries. And they're just trying to buy as low as they can. And they're not emotionally attached to the negotiation. So it creates this very, very unbalanced negotiation. And I want to talk about you, given all of your work and human hacking, the book and the research to try to figure out how entrepreneurs can kind of thread this needle and effectively negotiate this transaction.
I think your point, your first point is, I think, really valuable, right? Is that they need to be self-aware enough to know that there's going to be an emotional difference. You can almost imagine it if your kid came running into your office and, Daddy, I drew you this picture, and you went, and tossed it aside. The kid would be crushed, right? So you have to realize you're the kid in this, right? In this scenario. And when you go there, you're in love with your baby. It's the cutest thing, most beautiful thing you've ever seen in your life. This person is looking at it as just another dollar sign, another number. So that self-awareness has to happen, right? But in my world of social engineering, you never take an action against your client or somebody that you're going to do this service for without doing one thing first, and that's called OSINT, open source intelligence gathering, or what you might call recon. Every ounce of work in this field starts with recon. And I think any type of negotiation, especially one as important as selling your business, you need to do recon into the person. Like, imagine even if they reached out to you. I mean, we all get this. I have a business. I get these emails nonstop about, have you ever thought about selling? Click here to set up a quick meeting to discuss, and 90% of the time it's these people who just want to get information about your business, and then they offer you a loan or something, right? It's like not. But if you do recon on the potential buyer or buyers way before you even start, and let's just go to the point we assume they're legitimate. You're looking for things like, what are their pain points in making this decision for them, right? Why is this decision going to cause them any kind of stress? You need to try to anticipate what objections are going to come up about your sale of your business. Try as hard as you can to build a psychological profile. Now, what does that mean? I look for a bunch of stuff. Like, I'll look for their social media profiles, their likes, their dislikes, their family. And that sounds stalky and creepy, but it's not. You need to understand what's important to them. Right. If you're the person that you're about to sit in front of is all about brand reputation, then you want to focus on that during your negotiation. But let's say the person doesn't care about brand reputation. They care about value growth. Well, if you come in, you're talking about brand reputation, you're singing the wrong message. So when you do that recon to that OSINT, that gives you the level of preparation that you can frame your business the exact way it should be framed for the person you're sitting in front of. That's the first stage.
I loved it. Do the acronym again for me. It's OSINT.
Yeah, OSINT. So it's OSINT. So it stands for Open Source Intelligence.
Open source intelligence. And so, okay. So obviously you're going to their LinkedIn profile, you're ChatGPTing them to figure out like a little backstory on them. Any hidden hacks that people who aren't in this kind of counterintelligence surveillance world might be able to use to get a little bit of juicy information or maybe a kind of inside angle on somebody?
I love that. Love that question. So first, when you go to Google, let's just use Google. If you put the person's full name in quotes, so if you just put Chris Hadnagy in Google, you're going to get every Chris and every Hadnagy, right? But if you go and you put Chris Hadnagy in quotes, it looks just for that. So I do that first to see, are there any web pages that talk about them? Now, I might do something like, let's say, Chris Hadnagy, and then the word "and" is in all caps. And the reason you do that is it tells search engines that this is an operator, not an actual part of the search. And then let's say I put in another quotes, social engineer. Now I'm only going to find information about a guy named Chris Hadnagy, who is a social engineer. If I put all those words together without the quotes, it looks for each one of those words individually. So it's kind of like what we call a Google hack, where you can kind of target your research about a person into there. The second thing I always tell people is when you get to their LinkedIn, make sure you go into the section that you can click on that says contact info. A lot of times people will put their websites, their other social media, their date of birth. They'll put all sorts of stuff into that little contact box that can give you a ton of information. And then next, if it's open, look at who they're following, right? And a lot of times who they're following, who's following them might be their family, their friends, other business people. And you go and you check out any reviews about that person, any recommendations that they have. These will kind of give you an idea of what it will be like to work with that person. And then last but not least, I tell people, go to Glassdoor and search for that person's name. And now just make sure you got the right person, especially if it's a common name. And I don't know too many Chris Hadnagys, but there might be a lot of John Smiths out there. So if you find the John Smith and he's the worst person on the planet, make sure you're reading the right John Smith, right?
Yeah.
But
No, for
Glassdoor
sure.
is good for finding human reviews.
Hey, it's John. Look, if you're building to sell, I want to let you know about a resource you may find helpful. It's called the Value Builder Score, and it will evaluate your company in the same way that acquirers will look at your business. It'll give you a score on the 8 factors that drive the value of your company. You'll also get an estimate of value and things you could do to improve that value over time. Whether you want to sell now or in a decade from now, knowing how the movie ends, I think puts you in the catbird's seat, gives you all kinds of negotiating leverage. So it's available exclusively through a Value Builder advisor. So talk to your advisor. If you don't have one yet, you can go to valuebuilder.com/score. Let us know what industry you're in, and we will connect you with an advisor who specializes in companies like yours. Just go to valuebuilder.com/score. Those are great hacks, as it were, and great ways to sort of evaluate individuals. You mentioned that we all get these calls, and I think every listener to this show is getting stalked by, in many cases, bad actors. And I'll tell you the kind of flavors they get. They get, people trying to buy their business. So I'm going to say bad actors, and I'm going to recant that. So they get a lot of what are called ETA buyers. These are entrepreneurship through acquisition buyers. These are kids coming out of MBA school who have been trained on how to buy a business. And some are good and they're thoughtful and they can get financing. Others are just kind of smiling and dialing, just without really a lot of thought. They're just kind of going through to try to find a company to buy, and they do hundreds of calls without really a lot of due diligence. Those are the bad actors. The good ones are obviously doing their homework. So that's one type of buyer. The other type of buyers to get is kids. Again, I don't mean to be disparaging about young people, but like people out of undergrad who go to work at kind of boutique private equity groups, and they're just smiling and dialing, trying to find companies to buy, to get locked up in under an LOI and a no shop clause. So these are just kind of trying to find buyers. Again, our listeners have to sift through all this nonsense, trying to find legitimate buyers, and it's hard to figure out who's real and who's just kind of dialing down a list. Any sort of hacks you can give us to sort of cut the wheat from the shaft or identify real legitimate buyers?
Yeah. So I think if you do the same process I said, and not recon, but in that recon process, I mentioned trying to find out their value. What is their value, right? So is it brand recognition? Is it value proposition? Is it market access? Do that on yourself, that analysis. So what's important to you? Right. So if what's important to me, I give you an example for me. I'll just use myself.
Sure.
If I had an offer to buy my company today, what would be valuable to me is a few things. One, of course, enough money to make it worth, this.
For sure.
An exit strategy, right? I want a clear exit strategy for me, not one that takes 7 years, right? Second is I would love to have an understanding of what's going to happen to my people. Right. I built a team that I truly have grown to love and respect. And I don't want a scorched earth type of company to come in and be like, well, we're going to replace it with all these other people. It's great for me, but bad for them. Right. So these are some of my core values in that. And I can even tell you a personal story. I sat in front of a company who wanted to buy me, and they offered me a sum of money that just sounded so attractive. And then I said, what's the exit strategy? And it was 5 years. And I went, oh, no way. 5 years. No, I don't want that. Right. And they said, okay. Well, let me come back to the table. And they came back to the table. They didn't change anything, but the number was larger. And I went, okay, that's weird, but you didn't change the thing that's important. I said, let me ask you this other question. Every year I do a training in the UK for about a week. After that week's over, I fly my wife and kids over and we go away for a month. I just get off the grid. We drive around Scotland drinking whiskey. We do whatever the heck we want. Like, and we go hiking up mountains. Like, it's just awesome. And I want to be able to do that. Tell me, can I do that if I work for you? And their answer was, well, we'll discuss it. I went, nope. Right. And then they come back to the table with another 0. And I'm like, see, guys, this is the problem is you're not hearing what my value is. You could have got it for the first lower price if you had just said, yeah, take that month off every year and we'll lower the exit to 2 years. And you could have had it. But now I'm walking away. I actually got up and said, I'm walking away from this deal because you don't value what's valuable to me. You didn't give me any assurances about my people. And I got a 5-year contract that I'm going to work for someone else. I'm telling you right now, I'm one of those bad employees. So you don't want that, right? I walked away from that deal. But the moral of the story is I had to know what was my value. And the reason you need to know that helps you weed through. So if you're sitting, talking, you're doing your recon on a company, and what you find are they're just these dial and buy. If that's not what you're looking for, then right away you can weed through the chaff and say, okay, these 10, I'm not even gonna communicate. I'm not even gonna waste my time. But these 3 over here, I need to dig a little more. These are interesting, right? And that's how you can kind of not have every meeting from everybody who reaches out to you, forever. Right? That's one way to control that.
That's super helpful. And it helps us sort of on the front end of a relationship, identify whether there's a fit. I love what you said about employees. I think that's one of the most common things that founders look for is once they get past the immediate, like, what's the offer? What's the number? They go to, well, what's going to happen to my employees? Because they realize and acknowledge that these are the people that brought them to the dance and they don't want them to be completely torched, as to use your word, in the process. Let's assume we've gone through those boxes of ticked and so we've got a non-disclosure agreement in place. We've signed an NDA with the potential acquirer. Now we're into discussions. I know you would do a lot of work in terms of human hacking in negotiations. So let's assume that I'm in a negotiation to buy my business. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I may never get an opportunity like this again. What are some of the things that I need to be doing or not doing to maximize that negotiation? Like, take me through some of the human hacking core principles.
I'm going to do it by telling you a little story.
Sure.
I love tying stories in. I got hired by US SOCOM, so Special Operations Command, to go teach a social engineering class to a group of 12 guys, and this was their mission. They were going to get shoved out of a helicopter in some very sandy place, and they had to walk into a village and convince the people there to side with America, not using any weapons, not using any torture, not using any threats. And they're like, and we want no one to come back dead. So go. And I'm like, how is this my job? Like, I don't know what to do with that, right? I'm sitting down and thinking, okay, well, let me go through my core principles and let's see. And I think this applies. When you were asking that question, I'm like, okay, this story applies perfect, because just like that, this is your biggest negotiation. Well, these people, you either come back winning, you come back having killed people, you come back dead. Those are your only 3 options, right? So this is like a big deal. So I told them the very first thing you need to do after your recon is you have to craft what in my industry we call a pretext. And you can maybe use the word like narrative. What's your narrative? Right. So now let's say I do that recon. I know what valuable is to them. I know what's valuable to me. How do I want this story to come across? And I can tell you right now that emotion wins every time. Now, it doesn't mean you want to come in all sappy and stuff, but you have to have your numbers, right? You have to have your growth trajectory, your culture, your future potential. The buyer's going to want to know all that, but you got to tie each one of those facts to something emotional that has to stay within your narrative, right? So if my narrative is like we already said, I value my people, I value my freedom. That's my narrative, right? This guy values brand recognition and market growth. Well, I can't just always talk about my people, my freedom, because I'm not selling him, right? So my narrative has to be, while having my freedom, I was able to build such strong brand recognition that our go-to-market has now chopped in half because of how many people know what we do. Now I've covered everything, right? Well, I covered what is important to me, and I covered what's important to the potential buyer. Now we're linking up. And this is just stage 2, right? The pretext. From there, before I go to the last one, I'll tell you the biggest thing that's going to happen from here is trust. You have to be able to build trust. And because trust and rapport are one in one. And you're never going to sell your business if there's no trust. And what provides trust the most is being complete transparent. And I know that sounds hard. People are like, what? But I don't want to tell them all everything. I'm telling you, that's how you build trust. It's being completely and openly transparent. And then after you do that, you have to establish why scarcity is a principle that's very important. So scarcity being that something is not available forever. And you have to have a real thing. You can't say, look, I'm just telling you this because there's 10 other people ready to buy. If that's not true, don't do that. Right. But you can say, look, I put this out there. I have a number of people that are very interested and I have this many meetings set up and I only plan on going through this process for X amount of time. And when you put a time limit and show that other people are interested, and if you've built that trust, right, and you have that great narrative, FOMO kind of comes in where fear of missing out. Now they want to make this decision. They're going to have better questions for you.
Transparency is an interesting one because like when you're selling your home, the idea being you never actually tell, either your agent or the other side, like what your bottom line is.
Right.
So let me push back a little bit on transparency because there's certainly, I think, the prevailing wisdom in this space is like let the buyer come to you by putting a price on your business. Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, you don't want to necessarily tell them explicitly what your bottom line is, what your minimum number is, because you want to obviously do better than that. So how can I be transparent if I don't want to reveal some critical data?
Yes, that's a great question. I'm glad you pushed back. So I'm talking about being transparent. I'm talking about the tough business questions that are going to come up. See, sometimes, I'm trying to think of a quick example that I can give you in my company. Yeah, okay, I'll give you an example. We had an employee make a mistake. It's not an earth-shattering, company-losing mistake, but they hit the wrong button and they deleted data on an ongoing project for a paying client. Now, we caught it pretty early, but we still lost data. So now I could do one of two things. I can go back to my client and I can say, hey, there was an error, a technical error, and that campaign got messed up and we lost some data. That's truth, but it's not full truth. What I said is, hey, some of my team here, we made a mistake and we clicked the wrong button and we deleted data on your campaign. Here are the options to rectify. Let me know how you would like to handle this. And, and of course, apologies. That's what I mean by transparency. So I don't have to go to them and say, this employee named this, who I just fired, did this thing. Like, I don't have to do all that. It's just, hey, we made a mistake. So when you're talking about your business and these questions come up and say like, hey, I noticed here, this 3 years ago, you had a pretty big lull. What happened there? We had some employee issues. You know what? I had a really bad problem. I mean, I had an insider threat here. Really almost wrecked the company. It took us 6 months to get out of that. When we finally figured out what was going on, we had to clean house. We hired these consultants. And that's transparency.
Got it.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by that. Then you give them the sense of, I don't have anything to hide here.
Right. Right. And of course, hiding stuff is also illegal. In the context of selling a business. If you know of something, an impending lawsuit, or that you haven't filed your tax and you don't share that or you don't reveal that, it actually is fraud. So there's a legal implication to non-transparency if you actually don't know something. One of the things that I think entrepreneurs find really challenging in the negotiation of selling their company is being questioned. So here's the thing. Entrepreneurs, if you think about it, the DNA of an entrepreneur, they've chosen not to go to work at Procter & Gamble or Ford because in large measure, they like to kind of cut of their own jib. They like to go in their own direction. Right? They don't like being told what to do. They don't like having a boss. And so being questioned, why do you do it this way? Why do you treat customers like this? Why do you have this on your website? Why is your product this and not that? Why do you price it this way, not that? All legitimate questions coming from someone doing due diligence on a business they want to buy. But for an entrepreneur, it can really feel like kind of nails on a chalkboard. Hearing those questions can be just like, how dare you question the way I run? I've been doing this for 36 years and you're questioning me on how I do. It can create this sort of emotional tension that in some cases the acquirer doesn't even mean. They just legitimately want to know, like, why do you do it this way? But the entrepreneur's hearing maybe a lot more than is being asked of them. What sort of coaching would you give a founder who feels the kind of hairs on the back of their neck going up when they get questioned during diligence?
If I was coaching an entrepreneur, I would ask them this question if this came up. I would say, imagine you're in your 30s, 40s, whatever, you're young, male, female, and you're recently single. And now you want to date again. Right. So you want to get a partner. You really missed having a partner and you love having a partner. So you want to go get a partner. You go maybe to a bar or to friends that you know, and you invite this woman out to dinner. You take her out to dinner. Do you plan on making a decision as heavy as getting married and living the rest of your life with this person without asking one question? Are you just going to sit there and have a great dinner? Maybe talk about the weather, talk about how good the steak is, say, wow, she's really beautiful. Okay, hey, will you marry me? I think I saw enough. That's it. Now, there are some people out there that might do that. And those people most likely are not going to have the long-term relationships that we're talking about. Right? So you would not expect someone to say yes to something as serious as marriage without a lot of questions. Do you want to have kids? Are you planning on getting a job and working, or do you want to be a housewife? Like all these things that need to come up and you need to talk about are very important. Now, this guy's sitting in front of you and he's making a decision to about to part with $40 million into your pocket. Whoa, that's about as serious as saying, will you marry me? Right? So you better expect questions. And if you go into it with that mindset, so again, this is all a mindset and it's about self-awareness. When you go into the negotiation with the mindset, I'm going to get asked questions, and that's legit, because I wouldn't buy his business without asking questions, right? And you can even take it out of relationships. Last time you bought a car, did you just walk in, say that one, and walk out? No, you sat in it, you drove it, you asked, what's this button for? What's the gas mileage? What's it like? Where are the airbags? You asked all sorts of questions because you need to make a good decision.
Yeah, but buying a car is different than evaluating a business in that when you buy a car, the salesperson didn't decide what leather to wrap the steering wheel in. They get the car off the lot and they got to pitch that, it's Corinthian leather or whatever. Like they've got to try to make it. But in the case of an entrepreneur, they've in many cases made every decision in the way. They know the words on the website. They've chosen them specifically. They know the products, why they do it this way, or they know why they serve customers in a specific way, why we open at 7 and not 8 in the morning, and why Sundays are like, they have it all in their mind because they've made all these, in some cases, I'll call them idiosyncratic decisions, but they're all like kind of these weird, quirky decisions that for them make sense because it's the delicate alchemy that makes their business work. For an outsider, they might look at those decisions and go like, but why do you do it this way again? And why don't you have a phone number? And it can come across as very, almost like an attack on the entrepreneur's intelligence.
Yeah.
That's why I think they get their backs up, because they feel personally attacked, unlike just a salesman in a car dealership who might really feel no emotional. Does that make sense? Why they feel so emotionally?
It makes 100% sense. But again, I come back to it. Then what is your motive for even sitting in that chair? So if you're saying, I want to sell my business, that's why I'm sitting here. No one forced you to do that. Then you also have to understand what the game is going to be, right? And they're going to ask you questions. And if this person is sitting in front of me ready to buy my business, they may have ideas on how to make it better. So they might be asking questions to ask, like, why do you do it this way? And now my answer, they go, oh, that's actually pretty smart. Or maybe like, have you ever thought about this, or this? I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting with brand new employees, people have never done anything in this industry. I know it's different than selling, and we're coming up with a solution for a client. And it's the brand new person just came out of a whole nother field that comes up with the idea. And I'm like, that's genius. So if you enter any conversation with the idea that I don't know everything, right? This is a self-awareness check. I don't know everything. The person sitting across from me has the right to ask these questions, and I need to come at this with an open mind, right? This is kind of like where that self-awareness and understanding your own emotional take on things will be very important when you're in this, because we might not be nonverbal experts, right? Not everybody is. Not everybody's been taught. But we have this internal radar that reads what someone is not saying, right? So if you and I are in person and we are getting along, what's going to happen? We're going to actually start to lean towards each other, right? We're going to lean into each other. We might start doing something called mirroring, right? Where you start mirroring my body language, where like now if I stop talking, I might do this because that's what you're doing, right? And we start to mirror. And that happens without us thinking, because when rapport is built, you want to be similar because that tribe mentality says, oh, we're safe because we're alike, right? So if you are now getting angry, you got this angry, this guy's asking you, why is he asking me that? Now, maybe the guy sitting across you doesn't understand body language, but what happened is his face is seeing anger. So now he's like, yeah, why is this guy being pissy with me, right? And none of this is being spoken. It's all in here, right? But what's happening is now you're creating tension that makes a negotiation much more difficult to move forward. So you have to remember that your nonverbals will say the loudest things without saying one thing to the person you're negotiating with. And that is why emotional control is just so important in these things.
I'm glad you brought up nonverbals, because a few years ago, of course, during COVID, all these conversations had during Zoom. And so you're limited to how much exposure you have to the nonverbal cues. However, these days, most of the conversations are happening now in person. Mm-hmm. And so that gives us access to all five senses and the ability to kind of evaluate the other side of the table. So let's get into some of the nonverbal cues you might pick up on. Either you as an entrepreneur may inadvertently show something that that communicates something that you didn't want to communicate. Let's start there. What are some of the nonverbal cues that entrepreneurs need to be mindful of not displaying?
Do people get to see this podcast, or is it all audio?
Yeah, well, if they're watching on YouTube, they'll be able to see it.
Okay.
And I'll describe it for those listening on air.
If I walk into a room like this
right now, as Chris is looking up, his brow is furrowed, and he's kind of gazing up at the kind of ceiling.
What kind of a message am I giving you? You don't know me. What's your impression of me?
I'm not sure. I'd be like, this guy's kind of evaluating stuff, and maybe he's questioning. I'm not sure. I would find it odd.
That's good. You find it odd. Okay. But now you're just trying to process. You're trying to come up with an excuse for it, right?
Yeah.
So now we sit down at the table and
now Chris has crossed his arms, and now I know that verbal cue is, I don't believe a word you're telling me right now.
Okay. So there's something really, really important, right? Am I cold, or am I showing you doubt? And you can guess that by a couple things. One is I also had this sigh and I pursed my lips, right? So this is saying, I'm not really sure if I believe anything you're saying.
Yeah.
Right.
Pursed lips, sigh.
Puffing the chest out, a little bit of arrogance, like I'm the monkey in the room. I'm showing you who's bigger kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we look at nonverbals, I try to say, you don't need to be an expert and be able to read emotion. What you need to know is between comfort and discomfort. Those are very important differences, right? So while we're talking, and you've been doing this the whole time, John, you're shaking your head. Yes. That is a nonverbal indicator that you're hearing me, you agree with me, and hey, keep going. Whereas if you were, now you stopped agreeing with me, right? Now you're thinking about what I just said, and do I agree with it? And now you do this one shoulder shrug. Well, that's interesting. What you just told me is I don't agree.
The one shoulder shrug?
Yeah.
Really? Okay, so what is it about one shoulder shrug that means I don't agree?
I'm uncertain. You know, like if you were to say this, if you were to be like, if I'd like, hey, do you agree with this? You're like, nah, probably not. Right? You would do that. The one
shoulder would go up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you were like, I don't know, man, that's usually two shoulders, right? So I don't know. So uncertainty. But one shoulder is normally like, yeah, I'm doubting this. I'm not really into it. So when you learn some of these subtle things between comfort and discomfort, right? So if we're sitting here and you got a nice smile on your face, you're shaking your head. Yes, everything I'm saying is resonating with you. But then if all of a sudden I say something and you go, now I got to stop for a second. My self-awareness better say, okay, at that point, I didn't either hit that good enough or there's some trouble coming. So I'll be like, hey, let's just talk about that last point just a little bit more. let's talk about nonverbals, whatever, it wouldn't be nonverbals, but whatever the topic is. Let's talk about the business continuity plan that we were just talking about. Let me ask your opinion. What do you think about what I gave you already, right? And now I'm going to try to do, if you really are good at nonverbals, is once you see the incongruency, you can't call it out. So you can't say, hey, you were just smiling and then you stroked your chin and breathe heavily. Like, you can't do that. That's creepy. But if I notice it, I'll just say, so I just want to talk about the business continuity because I just want to make sure that everything is good with this here. So can you tell me, what were your thoughts when you read it? Or do you have any questions on this that I maybe didn't answer through the report, kind of thing? And now you're going to see, oh, okay, yeah. And if I do that a couple of times and I'm right, that's going to build unmeasurable rapport with you. Because you'll be like, man, this guy's like reading my mind. Like, he knows exactly what I'm thinking, right? And that's going to build a lot of trust.
Yeah. That's interesting. Coach us through this. So one of the things that comes up is oftentimes verbally, an acquirer will throw out a number. So they'll be like, Chris, we love your business. We were thinking it's probably in the kind of 5 to 6 times EBITDA range for us. Now, when the entrepreneur hears those words, that's the first time in many cases that the specter of valuation has been raised, and they've got to have some sort of reaction. If they're like, hell yeah, that sounds great. Yeah. Obviously they're showing their hands to being happy. If they kind of look furrowed brow, they can obviously be showing that they're not happy with that valuation. What sort of on the spot coaching would you give an entrepreneur who's just been told a number by the other side?
Yeah. So first thing I would always do is you want to give some emotion, but it has to be neutral. Oh, so John, thank you so much for just throwing that out there. I really appreciate it. And can you tell me what made you come up with that exact number, that exact equation? I'd like to understand what your thinking process was on that, right? I'm going to throw that back to get you to tell me, well, why do you think it's 5 to 6 times EBITDA, right? And now as you're talking, I have a chance to get that information in before I get too emotional, and be able to do the math in my head. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, where are we at? Is that number really good for me or not? But I still got to be active listening to you. So now you're explaining your process of why it was 5 to 6 and not 10 or more or less than 5 or 6. And now I have a couple questions on that. Do you mind if we just explore that a little bit and start to ask? I would ask really intelligent questions to keep the other person talking so I can get more information on why they chose that path. That will also tell me if they were flexible. If they were flexible, is there a way to put that up? Are they just throwing out a number to see what happens? And and do that. But I'd be really cautious to give a, oof, really? That's it? Or a, wow, oof, okay, where do we sign? You don't want to play the poker face where you're acting like nothing happens, because that doesn't help either side. So like, oh, thank you. I want to understand this. So please help me. What made you come up with that equation?
And my observation from you just role playing that was you were very neutral. First of all, you immediately answered. There was no pregnant pause, and you're like, there was no thinking. It was just like tell me more about what made you come up with that number. And I couldn't tell in the way you delivered it whether you were happy with the number or offended by the number. I couldn't tell. It was super neutral. So,
and that's important.
Yeah,
that's important, right? Because again, if you're super offended, they might be thinking, okay, what is this guy like? Gonna do. And then second is if you're super happy, he's like, well, we just got it lowballed, right? So you want to keep it neutral until you understand their thinking, because you may have and I go into every negotiation this way. So I know this is a hard mindset to get, but I go into every conversation with the idea that I'm not the smartest in the room, and I'm probably going to learn something from wherever I'm talking to. And I do that because if you come into the room thinking, I know everything there is to know about social engineering, and you can't possibly teach me anything, John, that is really a bad way to approach a conversation, right? So I need to go into this, even though it's my baby, my business, realizing that this person has probably done this before. I've never sold my business before, so I don't know what to expect. So he has experience that I don't. So I want to understand how you came up with this, and I want to learn from you.
Yeah, love that response for sure. The other one we get, Chris, and I'd love to know your coaching here, is a lot of our entrepreneurs get the question, why do you want to sell? And if they're transparent, going back to a word you used earlier, it would sound like this. Well, Chris, I'm exhausted. I hate every one of my employees. My wife doesn't talk to me anymore, and I just got to get out. Like, I'm just so exhausted, right? The buyer wants to hear, well, I'd love to find a partner that I could help grow the business. The buyer wants to hear that you're willing to stay on for the next 10 years, and that together you're going to build something. So how does an owner deal with that question? Because the truth is often not what the buyer wants to hear.
So to be honest, I would be honest, but I'd be honest with a little bit of story and humor, right? Instead of saying everything you said. So if that was you and I would say, you know what, John, when I started this company in 2010, I actually had no clue that we would become this. I didn't know. And I loved what I was doing. And I thought, wow, now I sit back and I'm like, from 15 years to this, and now we have all these employees, we have all these services, we're dealing with Fortune 100s. I'm like blown away. But one thing I never thought to myself was that I would actually stop doing the work and just manage people. So you know what I really want? I want to get this back to the core. I want to get to the things that I love to do. And I don't love running a company. So that's one of the reasons why I want to sell. I want to get back to doing things I love. There's my answer.
It's really good. Because you haven't lied.
I haven't lied.
You've said what's frustrating you, which is employees, but you've also wrapped it in a narrative which is like great, which is because of all this growth, we've had this incredible run, and
And I need your help, John. I need your help. That's why I'm coming to you with this potential, because I've read your files, I've seen you online, I looked you up, and I know that you have no problem with all the things that cause me stress every day. So I want to get back to doing what I'm good at, what made this company as successful as it is.
Let me give you one more scenario, because I love your answers. So another one that comes up a lot, Chris, is this concept of retrading. So you agree, the buyer says, yeah, we're gonna buy your business, and we're gonna pay, I'm just gonna pull a number out, we're gonna pay $10 million. Amazing. You get all excited, you buy the ski boat and the chalet and whatever, all the stuff you've ever wanted. You tell all your friends, your spouse, and then a week before closing day, they say, I know we said 10, but wow, we found a few things in diligence, so we're thinking more like 6.5. What do you do as the entrepreneur at that stage?
Okay, well, my first advice is do not spend money that you have not put in your pocket. That is my first advice. Do not spend money that you don't have, right?
Right.
I think we've all done it once or twice in our life, but that any time you spend money that you don't actually physically have, you're going to lose at some point, right? So no. But the second thing I would say is like, okay, hold on, Bill, we're at closing here and you're lowering this by $3.5 million. Can you explain to me, please, the logic behind that? I'd like to understand it. And tell them, don't just accept it or not accept it. Tell me what it is that you found during discovery that makes that worth $3.5 million. I need to understand that.
Okay.
And let them explain.
Yeah. So they're going to explain it, and they'll have prepared some sort of like business school logic about, we ran the numbers and we thought the market size was X, but really when we take into consideration these three factors, which we learned in diligence, that it's actually kind of X minus 10%. So we got to factor that into our model, and the model really looks out for 10 years. And so what the spreadsheet says is that, unfortunately we can't pay any more than 6.5.
John, one of the reasons I even made it to this point in my negotiation with you is because of how much I respected what I learned about your business and how you do business. I didn't make it to this point with anyone else that came to us to buy our company. And one of the core values that I know you and I both share that we had was being able to stick to our word. Like, our word sometimes as business owners is vital. So I am having a real hard time understanding how we lost $3.5 million over a couple weeks. And I've lived up to every aspect of what we had said here. So I really, before I can even sign off, I just need to really understand, because it's not really sitting well. And that to me is an honest answer, but without drawing the hard line in the sand, and still trying to say, I need to understand how you made this change.
You still haven't slammed your fist on the table and said, no way, we wouldn't
not yet.
Penny less than, okay, well, what would cause you to do that? Or would you say not yet? Is there a stage that you ever get to that? Or?
No, see, for me, any negotiation, anything from buying a car to selling your business, I go into it with the full authority in my mind to walk away if I don't get what I think I need to get. Right. And like I told you before, this guy offered me millions upon millions of dollars to buy my company. but he wanted a 5-year signed contract, and maybe I get to take my vacation, and I lose control over who we keep and who we don't. That was all the red flags. So it didn't matter that there was going to be millions of dollars in my account. I'm going to have a guilty conscience. I'm going to be working more than I probably ever worked before. And the people that are left are going to hate my guts. So no, I got up and walked away. And I don't regret it. I don't look back at that and say, man, I walked away from all that money. I don't do that because I know I made the right decision. So if you go into this with the idea, I have to sell this, or this is my last effort, like if I don't, I'm going to go nuts. That is the wrong mental space to be in negotiations, right? You don't go to buy a car when your present car has died. That's the worst. When you walk in and that desperation is on your face and like, there's my car on the highway dead, I really need one. You're not going to get the best service because they know you're desperate. So you can't go into this desperate. You got to go into this at any point in time saying, you know what? I was excited when you said $10 million, John. Why? Because I really felt that you valued my company the way I valued it. 6.5 really makes me feel like it's not the value that I and you both felt it was just a couple weeks ago. So for me, it just doesn't really sit well to have lost that because of some spreadsheet that I don't really understand.
Awesome. Another scenario that comes up is the one that you dealt with in the person that tried to acquire your business, which is the specter of an earnout. So they'll often use this sort of bait and switch. They'll say, Chris, man, we think your business is amazing. You know, we want to pay $10 million for your business. Wow, that's amazing, you say. And then they reveal that it's actually not 10 million up front, it's 2 up front, and the opportunity to earn the next 8 over the next 7 years. And again, entrepreneurs feel conflicted because if they say, well, I'd never do that, the natural rebuttal from the acquirer is, oh, don't you believe in the numbers you've shared with us? Don't you think the projections are real? You didn't lie, did you, during the diligence process about your number? Hate to think we were negotiating with someone who was lying to us. And so you get this sort of, natural, like you've backed yourself into a corner. What advice would you give when they try this sort of earn out, sort of bait and switch?
So first, again, I'm going to come back to my old faithful, which is questions. I'm going to ask questions. Okay, John. So you said 2 million up front, and then I get to earn the 8 over 7-year period. So why 7 years? That's maybe my first question, right? Mm-hmm. And then what's the potential for early buyout? Is that even on the table? What are the risks of loss of that 8 million? Or is that 8 million guaranteed in the next 7 years? Or is there a potential that I earn less than 8 million? Oh, John, is there a potential that I earn more than 8 million if I take this deal? Right? And I get all those facts first, because let's say there's zero risk that I'm going to lose. There's a potential to earn more than the 8 million. And they already signed off and know that I'm out of here in 2 years. So I might sit on the board in 2 years, but my exit strategy is 2 years. So you can't keep me here for 7. So if you've answered all those questions, I might take that deal, right? If I have a chance to earn more. But if you tell me there's a chance you're going to lose, and I might still even try to negotiate, like, okay, John, I hear what you're saying. Why don't we do this? Why don't you give me 4 million up front and do the 6 million over a 3-year period? And then we can talk about that.
Interesting. In Human Hacking, your book, you talk about hacking the amygdala. Can you just kind of walk through that concept for us?
Sure. So the amygdala, because we have 2 of them. They're small walnut pieces size of gray matter in our brain. And they're in the limbic system, and their whole purpose of why they're there is to what's the word I'm looking for? Process stimuli from our external modalities, right? So before our brain kicks in. So let me give you an example, and it creates physiological and psychological change with milliseconds before the brain actually catches up. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're deathly afraid of snakes. So you walk out into your yard, and out of the corner of your eye, you see a long black thing in the grass. You do this, right? Now, a bunch of things occurred. One is your eyes opened wide, and that's a fear response because you're looking. You need to take in, am I in trouble? The next is you gasp for air, and it oxygenates your blood, preparing you for the fight or flight, right? The first one is freeze. And then when you tense your muscles, it releases adrenaline into your bloodstream, which prepares you for defense or running. Okay, now, 150 milliseconds to 300 milliseconds later, your visual cortices actually see it's the garden hose. And you go, silly, and it's over, right? But if it wasn't the garden hose, think about what just happened. Your amygdala prepared your body for what needs to happen next. I'm either getting the heck out of here or I'm killing this thing. One of those two things is going to happen, right? When we trigger, now, one of the main researchers into this was Dr. Daniel Goleman. And in his book, Emotional Intelligence, he actually did research that showed that when our amygdalas are fired, our frontal cortex is not. So if we hijack someone's amygdala and we get them into that emotional state, that means they're less likely to use logic and critical thinking centers to make their next decision. So when you ask thought-provoking questions like, well, tell me, why did we just lose $3.5 million? That's not an emotional reaction. And you probably want to steer from that when you're asking those important questions because you want them to give you the data, right? But now when you're talking about getting more money, that needs to be tied to an emotion. That needs to be tied to a story. You're talking about your exit strategy, that needs to be tied to a story. You know, John, one of the most happiest things in my life was when my daughter was really little and we had a chance to go to Scotland for the first time. And we took 3.5 weeks as a family, driving all over Scotland, trying different food. I haven't been able to do that in years because of how busy I've been. So one of the reasons I'm really excited about what we agreed to with our exit strategy is that I'm going to get to do that again. Now my kids are a little bit older, but we're going to get to do that again. See, now I'm tying why that exit strategy is so important into emotion. You're smiling, you're picturing it, you see how valuable it is to me, which means if you start to devalue that, you're going to be taking something away that is not going to make this deal go through, right? So when you want them to remember the value for you, tell a story. When you want information from them, make it logical and factual. And that's how you can control amygdala hijacking to be to your benefit.
I know your time is precious. I could do this with you forever. The book is Human Hacking. The podcast is Social Engineer Podcast. Christopher, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, John. It was excellent.